Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. Today we don't have Ramses, but we have Seibrik. How you doing, Seibrik? Really excited to have you on the episode here. Old school Smash player from way back when, still doing big things in the Smash community right now. So, do you want to talk to the viewers about your program that you have going on?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for even having me on and everything. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. Tier Breakers is a old kind of like a child of mine that I used to do back in Brawl, actually, when we were initially kind of dwindling on our numbers at weeklies. We had like 12-person weeklies, all killers, me, Esam Shaky, MVD, Nick Riddle. Like, it wasn't like an easy time coming out there, 8-Bit Man. So, we wanted to something that could help, stimulate the community a little bit. And so it was basically just an idea of getting like all the best players to like sign up for this thing called Tier Breakers, where they will essentially draft crews for the next 3 months. They'll be on a crew that they draft in the beginning. And over the course of those 3 months, I've picked out very specific weeklies called Tier Breaker sanctioned events. Weeklies that are already happening. They're just regular tournaments. But those specific weeklies will net their team's points based on how their teammates perform. Really just based on their placement. Wherever they get, they'll get a certain amount of points. At the end of the season, after 15 weeklies that we've kind of picked out ahead of time, there is going to be a crew battle final bracket where all the crews have to face each other, and their seeding of that bracket's based on their points that their team collected over the course of the season. So the team that got the most points over the season will obviously have like a bye or at least an easier round one or so. And while everyone dukes it out, none of their captains, their best players, are allowed to play in that crew battle. So it really is putting a lot of weight on the emphasis of like getting time with your players, following them around at tournaments, reaching out to them between events, seeing how you can help them progress, unblock them from progress. And it's been really, really well received. Kind of blew me out of the water. And back in the day, we would get like 20, 25 entrants, most of which was like the standing good players. And then, it's just kind of more attractive thing to get into than just going to tournaments. Everyone feels like they have to be a certain strength to start going, which like I want to get people over that hump. Mm-hmm. And so we got like 60 players signed up, and we started on Saturday. And I haven't formally opened it yet, but from my DMs alone, about maybe 20 more players on a wait list that I'm going to be trying to like funnel into the season so they don't have to feel left out. And we have 12 teams, and like I can read off like just some of the captains really quick if you don't mind. Like, it's kind of crazy. We have I got captain. You get captain by getting first seed in their pool on the first day, so it's something that you have to like earn essentially. And so it's me, Apple, D2DA, Riku, Seal, Dominator, Unova, Hispanic at the Disco, Narnia, PK Basis, Anathema, Sure Hyper, and Chocotaco. Like quite literally, our entire PR is on it, and then the one PR that isn't on it couldn't make it, and they're on the wait list essentially. So
nice.
I'm blown away. I like the amount of support that we got in this season so far. And the first tournament for it is we just did the drafting yesterday, so we have actually all the teams formed. And the first tournament Tier Breaker Sanction event is this Friday, and it's going to be pretty crazy at the R.O.B. new Miami venue that we have.
Yeah, that's dope. I think these kinds of programs is a great way to integrate maybe some newer players, getting like breaking some of the social aspects too, in terms of just like maybe
for sure,
too shy to talk to some of the other more experienced players that ask for tips and advice and stuff like that. So this is a great way to kind of bridge that, bridge some of the top level players or PR players with some of the newcomers or some people that are, just newer to the scene. So I'm really
or thinking about entering and they're like not sure. Like, it helps when there's this like other end of the like a funnel sitting there with their hand out of like good players trying to look out for you, like basically immediately.
Yeah.
And I'm trying. This is not like a guarantee yet, because right now it's just pot money. But I'm trying to figure out ways to get enough funds to send the entire winning crew to a national, basically.
That'd be really dope, yeah.
Like that so that every season we can send a 5th seed player or a 4th seed player to a major. Like, I can't think of a better way of like getting to improve at a fast rate. So that's the goal, at least. So that's really all I can say. If Tierbreaker sounds really interesting to you, definitely hit me up at Seibrik on Twitter. Hit up the Twitter for Tierbreakers. It's at @tier_breakers. All the links will be in the description below of this video. And also the Start GG will be there as well, just if you want to get some more information or maybe see the trailer or something like that. But yeah, I'm really excited. Every season will be better and better. And if you didn't love your team for some reason this season, the next season you'll always have a chance of getting another captain. So I think it's a really cool concept.
All right,
and not just because I thought of it.
Yeah. And I'm glad there's a lot of success. And obviously, you started back in Brawl. Ultimate, the player base is a lot bigger. So I just love the systematic way of trying to attract newer players, and even just the concept of learning and teaching on both ends, kind of putting some of the PR players in positions where it's like, oh, well, I never really tried to teach or coach players or help.
Oh, no, yeah.
Right? It's
easily
like
half
really
of them. Even one or two people, I mean, you might not be surprised to hear this, but like one or two people that earned captain, like turned it down. Like it's like a lot of pressure for someone sometimes, especially when they have other things in life going on, completely understandable. So like I'll pass that down to the second seed at that point. But like it's been awesome so far, and we only just started. So I can't wait for Friday. And it's one weekly each week that we're focusing on to kind of help everyone in the region like align on one specific place to like attack.
Yeah.
And then the other weeklies are about like getting better for the next one. Dang. It's like a PR system that is more engaging to the lower level players, right? Like
anything
the PR is like a nice
gets players, especially the more entrenched players, into the habit of service towards the attendees who don't normally get as much from entering brackets. Like fundamentally, half of our tournament structure is the O2ers, and we need to give back to those players and make sure that they're also receiving the same enriching experiences that everybody else gets when they attend events. So like whether that's side events, just giving them the educational resources, the social engagement that everybody else normally gets. For those who are not aware, one of the big draws to competitive players is that the players who are common on the competitive circuit tend to see each other, tend to develop social relationships, tend to be friends. And these are essentially your friends that you only get to see when
most of my best friends. Yeah, I made from Smash 100%. I made a Discord for this to service everything together and have a solid place for updates and whatnot. And so we have like a private Discord for each crew. And then we have like a general one, like different purposes or whatever. But like it's just been like hustling like since we started and then at every like stage of it, it's like they're typing the next piece up or talking about it. And like I'm kind of slowly getting to each stage, because I have a lot going on. But it's actually been working kind of in an excitement favor kind of thing. Like it's like bubbling up every next step. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much extra time about it. I'm just really excited. And if you let me, I will talk forever about it. So if you have any interest in it, definitely hit me up and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go into the topic for today's podcast, which is going to be, it's going to be based off of a Lima tweet. I think this tweet was really, really great. And I'll read it out loud. The problem with Smash Ultimate right now is all the Smash games, there are problem players and problem solver players. So the problem players just abuse X or Y and say, deal with me. If you can't, I win. And that's it. But in Ultimate, it's 98% problems and it sucks. So I think this is an interesting tweet, especially when we're thinking about today's meta. I think today's meta, there are a lot of characters that find success that create problems that are either like low risk, high reward, or the problem is very easy to do, but you get a lot out of it. I think the first character that comes to mind is Steve, right? Steve is a character that presents a bunch of like problems, right? It's like, okay, here are these blocks, get around these blocks, and there's mix-ups that I get when you try to destroy the blocks. Am I going to dash attack at you, forward smash you? I'm going to continue mining. I'm going to make another 3-stack and go behind that 3-stack and keep mining, right? And then there's other characters like Game & Watch, where it's like, okay, let me present to you Neutral B at ledge, right? Super easy ledge trap, and you get a lot out of it compared to other characters that might have to kind of position themselves or do other proactive things to get their ledge trapping going. and then falling up air. Game Watch has a lot of simple, easy, effective tools, and he gets a lot of damage out of all of these interactions. And then there's even other characters that I think that aren't necessarily hard to play, or no, they're not necessarily easy to play, but they're still problem characters. Like Snake, I think, is a very hard character to play, but very similar to Steve, where it's like, oh, okay, like I'm presenting these grenades, I'm presenting this like minefield of problems, and from how you solve those problems, that's where my counterplay comes through. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and you can kind of weave it back and forth with like ease of play, simplicity, very simple like problems that you can establish, or just simple gameplay. But I think it's a very interesting topic, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Bam, you can go first.
Yeah, man. I absolutely agree. I think that it's something I actually mentioned too on Twitter as well, that one of the very interesting things about just in general, right? Like when you're looking at anything competitive, right? You're looking at these things that are like strong, and also that at the current meta that can be abused, right? And as people grow and the meta changes, and people get to a place where they start to redefine what the game is actually truly about, and they start solving things a lot more, then you get to a place, right, where you're going to find things that, like, yeah, they're not just going to be all gimmicks. They're going to be like actual strong problems that you truly just have to solve, right? And usually for most people, that's going to be, it's easier to go and address the problem. And especially in a game where you have a multitude of characters that are, this is one of the most balanced fighters, like, honestly, I've ever seen, especially like in the modern era. And you have to really take into account that, yeah, so you're going to have a lot of characters with a lot of tools that it's going to take time to learn them. And then even if you do learn them, they're still going to be strong. All right. And it's just versus also too, like the ease of those tools, right? And what you get from that, like, again, we talked about it a little bit already, right? But Game Watch is a character, very like turnkey, right? Very simple. The standard of, I can juggle what I have for my ledge trap, I want to kill, click this yellow button, cool, like I hit this yellow stick, dope, I got someone, call it a day, right? And it's going to be that's just going to be things that people have to take into account. And I do think that one thing, to me, that's like part of the beauty of a game, in my opinion, just like in terms of what I enjoy. I love the idea of solving these things and breaking these things down. And I do think that this is something that I know people are like, oh man, there's also these problems, and people just start out these problems or whatever. It's like, I honestly just feel like that's the nature of the beast, right? That's the nature of like meta. People are going to take problems and throw them at you, dude. Like that's how it goes, right? And if there's effective strategy there, people are going to lean into it, and you see it across all competitive spectrums, dude. Beyond Smash, beyond fighting games, beyond gaming, right? That's just how it goes. And I think people just really need to start understanding that you too should be leaning into problems, because that is good. When you can find stuff that is problematic for your opponent and it can rustle their feathers, if it's just a really strong, effective strategy, if it's something that is very low in terms of commitment for you, and it's something that doesn't mean that you have to allocate so much mental fortitude to perform it, then you can utilize that to read other aspects of their opponent's game plan. And these things are just all important when you're doing anything in terms like in a competition in this way, right? So I think it's a great tweet from Lima. I think, to me, that's interesting, is that it took like some people aren't really looking at games like that for a while, when that's like something that's pretty fundamental in my eyes. And then I think the two is, for a lot of people, they need to come to terms that, yes, that's going to happen. Part of the beauty of these games is that problem solving. You're going to have to do that versus your opponent, while simultaneously being able to utilize your own pragmatic strategies to not only get damage and get kills and whatever it may be, but also learn, like you're essentially testing your opponent to see like what they go through, and you take the information and go from there. That's just very fundamental in how these things operate. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good tweet. I think it's a good discussion for the community to have. I do fear that a lot of people just use this as ammo to justify their lack of taking time to solve. That's the one problem I have, and that's not necessarily Lima's fault. It's just the community's reaction to things. But that's where I stand.
What do you think, Tony? Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, David.
I'm just excited. I'm sorry.
No, go, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is very reminiscent of the Mute video to me, right? Like it's very similar-esque, where it's just like there are just characters that are easy / consistent, and then there are characters that might be harder but maybe more rewarding. And like it just reminds me very much of Palu, where I think most players on a base level will put Palu in this problematic bucket, where it's like, man, like I just can't play my game against Palu, hence she's a problem. Like she's so like oppressive, like, right? I think that's going to be a common thread amongst any of the problem characters, is in some way they feel oppressive. It could be Steve's wall, it could be just Aegis's range and speed and power. It can be someone that just is really good at gimping your character for whatever reason, right? And then with Palu, it's like, oh well, so many people want to play their own game, and Smash is such a free form game that more often than not, you're gonna jump in part of your game plan, probably a lot. And that just happens to be the thing that Palu is good at solving. Like the most of the layer 1 of people's neutral involves some form of jumping in most layers. And the Palu is going to feel that way, or that, man, this Nair just blows me up. This damage is not fair. The dash attacks catch all my landings. It doesn't matter if I throw out a hitbox. And then you can see, like, you get to certain levels of the bracket where that can sometimes start to change, where suddenly certain levels of players aren't going to just start jumping into Palu or jumping around Palu, and they're just going to sumo wrestle this match with their feet planted on the ground. And then suddenly the roles reversed in that one like play style, that in finding that style as your tool to deal with Palu, all of a sudden you've given her a problem. Like now she has to solve how to open you up, and you're not jumping and giving her the easy hits. So she has to then rely on her mobility and her pressure with back air or forward air, and hope you don't parry it, and hope you don't catch on to their just like pace, I guess, of how they try to control neutral. They're not just blowing you up anymore, and they have to like really trick you to get that grab or that dash attack or get you to jump at some point. So I think I think what we think is problematic in the meta is only because we haven't solved it yet as a community. There isn't like the video saying, oh well, this is how you deal with block for the whole cast. Like we don't have those answers at our disposal. And so, to your point, Bam, like some of this shit's really good. Like there aren't going to be like one blanket thing that everyone can do, and your character might have to have a very niche response to deal with that, like Cloud's sword against Steve. Like those interactions have to exist. So I think there was one point of your topic also that was like, how can this play into people's choices in like maybe who they main or who they choose to pick up as a secondary? And I do think there's probably a lot of value in considering, is your character a problem? And then what beats that problem? And then what character can you play that beats that thing that beats your problem? Like, so you kind of look for problem solving in your decision making between your characters, or you have a really, really polarizing character that's weak at something, like you're Little Mac and you have a crap recovery, so you can go with a character that solves for that really strongly, like Sora or Meta Knight. And I actually have that in my region where a Little Mac player secondary Sora, and like that's the dichotomy that they'd go with. Both problems for their own reasons, but when you have some knowledge or matchup knowledge and you know those answers, like, it gets better basically with more experience. I do think that there are a lot of characters whose initial game plan, I think this is probably where the line is on what is really a problem in the meta. Their initial game plan is just very effective and hard to overcome. And so, and that doesn't mean that, okay, actually, it's not that it's hard to overcome. It's that their initial game plan does very well into other characters' initial game plans. And so you immediately hit a layer of player in bracket where in the first 2 rounds of bracket, they might not have those answers with their character. Like they're just at that first layer of how to play their character, and they haven't learned their tools to solve for those problems. And so once you get there, like you start having to rely on other strategies, but you shouldn't be changing your game plan if it's working. So abuse it until someone shows you they have the key, basically. And there's a lot of characters that do that better than like Snake's natural game plan. Like you either have to know how to never get hit by the grenades, or to challenge his pacing, or you have to dive in at some point. And so I think it's really like a question of like who naturally controls pace very well. And I think someone like Min Min, people would say that's a big problem because you're immediately having to play their game.
Yeah, right at go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're in.
Did they ram like
from the start, man?
Yeah.
So what are your initial thoughts, Tony, on this topic? I know this topic can go in a lot of different directions, but I think, again, I just think it's such an interesting topic, and it can apply to so many dynamics of the game.
So I think that my favorite aspect of the discussion is that there's multiple layers to it. So the first thing I think is that it's an etymological conversation itself, because I've heard this conversation phrased as a question and ask. So rather the ask and the answer, I've heard it referred to as proactive and disruptive. And I think that last part is how I like to think of it. I think it's easiest to understand, and that you generally have things that say, I win the game, and you have things that say, you don't lose the game. And so the idea here is that you, another dimension of it is that the same tools that you guys referred to as problems, so things like Steve blocks, are things that I usually refer to as disruptive elements. So the idea is Steve is never going to win the game by just placing like 1,000 blocks. It doesn't matter. He's not going to win the game doing that. It doesn't get him anything. And so it's more so a matter of it's a support tool that enables him to synergize with another support tool, which is gathering resources, so that he can then access the things that actually win the game. So again, if Steve has 1,000 diamonds, which he can't actually do, but the idea is it doesn't matter how many diamonds he has unless he actually uses them for his proactive elements. So these are the things that win us the game. So the idea here is that we want to go ahead and look at what things are getting you to the victory screen, and then work your way back. And generally the way this plays out, and I think that this is one of the more common frustrations within the game, is that generally whenever there's two players who both know what their win conditions are, what gets them to the victory screen, both players are going to essentially go for that. And so the question is, well, if both players race to the victory screen, who wins? And generally what that comes down to is one character is going to be better reaching or racing to that victory screen than the other character is. And so they either are going to just win every single time, or else the character that makes it to the victory screen slower. So let's say if character A 2 touches the opponent and character B 3 touches the opponent, then both of these are still very strong punish characters, but obviously if they play the matches, character B should never win. And so what character B then needs to look into is to answer things, to have a disruptive element that reduces the 2 touch so that they either can't touch or so that it's no longer 2 touch. And so in Snake's case, this is a third layer in which simplicity versus complexity. So Snake Grenade both moves him toward the victory screen, and that it both racks up damage, supports into his other KO, like his up airs, and it also disrupts the opponents. And so, for example, let's say Kazuya, who is generally regarded as the premier victory racer, is suddenly disrupted, because even when he gets these big combos on Snake, fundamentally he is not going to be 2 touching Snake, because the grenade is going to disrupt whatever that is. And it does not reward Kazuya as much for having his base combos down, because the kind of punishes that he's getting are going to be different, but it essentially just changes what Kazuya's punish routes look like. And so essentially what we're looking at is that Snake just pressing the B button or mashing the B button is both his proactive and disruptive element of the game. And so even though it is a hybrid tool that can be used complexly, it is ultimately a simple character because you don't have to ask yourself, well, what should I jab here? No, you pull grenade. And so that's generally how that works out. Likewise, I don't think that every character in the game it should be restricted to being a problem solver, is I believe the way that's phrased. So ironically enough, when I think of Bayonetta, one of the first things I think of is a character that combos you, that basically is going to just control wherever you're going and doesn't need to touch you many times. And so she is very much a problem asker or a proactive character. Like she can essentially run through the training dummy in a record amount of time. And that's ultimately how you distinguish the two. Is it going to be able to finish a 99 stock match in 30 minutes? And if not, then that is probably a problem answering based character. And so, for example, using Palutena, as Seibrik mentioned, she is very good at closing off the opponent's game plan. She is not very good at going ahead and scoring stocks because it's very easy to disrupt her most rewarding game plan. And so every single character in the game can essentially do things like just reposition their air drift or use an air dodge to prevent her from doing things like fair to down air to go ahead and get her most rewarding KOs. You can just block her charge smash attacks, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that she doesn't have these very high reward tools, just that the amount of both the amount and the distribution among the cast of the counterplay to it is both simple and easily accessed. So whereas comparing that with Snake, not every single character in the game can really hard punish Snake for pulling grenade. And then you have characters like Game & Watch who can very hard punish Snake by using his bucket to get essentially one hit kill bucket. And so by Game & Watch playing an entirely different kind of game where it's just, well, I can take these hits, but as long as I get my bucket, I'm still going to outpunish you, even though Snake usually hits harder than Game & Watch. And so the idea here is that Game & Watch's disruptive elements against Snake in particular are very powerful. And on top of that, they're usually fairly low execution, especially relative to a lot of the roster at that level of play, like at top levels of play. Game & Watch is not difficult to execute relative to how he is at lower levels of play. If you just watch a Cloud player move in training mode with nothing to do, no combos to use, you can tell the difference between a top Cloud and a lower level Cloud instantly. Like it literally takes seconds to see the difference. Versus Game & Watch, maybe some platform movements, but like, what's the difference between Meister down smashing and me down smashing? Like he outclasses me multiple times. It just doesn't matter because execution wise, there's not a whole lot of difference there. There's no like frame tight combos. There's a few timing window things. And then of course there's general applications, but Meister getting his spot dodge down smash are things he could do with Game & Watch. He could do with Incineroar without having ever played the character before because the spot dodge is the same timing. And as long as he knows that it works, it's pretty much the same. And so what we come down to is ultimately because he could be doing it on pretty much any other character with comparable tools without having practiced it, we can call that executionally simple, which is a separate dimension of it again. So it's not just a matter of how commonly applicable it is or how, I guess we could call it hybrid its application is. These are all different ways you can look at that discussion. And I think these are all different things that people are thinking of when they are referring to problems and problem solving. And so I think that it also leads to a lot of people, or most people even, who have experience with the game having a pretty strong opinion on it. And they might not necessarily be talking about the exact same dimension of what they could be referring to. So I think it's a great topic personally. And what did you think of Steve's ability to go for things like timers, for example? Or what would you think of Electric Wing Godfist as an answer? So let's say he's specifically using it to stop his opponent from winning the game, like as the invincible tool. What do you think about that, Charles?
I personally view Electric Wing Godfist as a problem, and it's like it's so weird to me because even in Lima's tweet he specifically says players, but the way I view it is like character tools. And for me, the way I want everyone to view it, or at least the way I view it, is when you look at a single character, you can't just say like, oh, this character only presents problems, right? Because you have to have a hybrid of both. I think a lot of characters will lean more into one category than another and stuff like that. But for Kazuya, and it also depends on the matchup too, right? Because even when I think Ice Climbers is a great example. So Ice Climbers, if you have a good matchup, you're the problem character, right? Like Sheik's trying to open Ice Climber up, Diddy's trying to open Ice Climber up, Fox is trying to open Ice Climber up, and you're presenting this unique problem, which makes the matchup like difficult, but it more so it depends on how developed the matchup is, right? Like, oh, are you as a Sheik player ready to hit a forward air, but that you hit Popo first? So then the hit lag from Nana puts you in this scenario where it's like you think you have or you feel like you have this certain frame advantage, but I actually can shield. And I actually can just reversal the situation, but it depends on which climber you hit first and yada yada, right? So there's all these unique Ice Climber situations, or, oh, I'm turned around shield, Nana's in front, so if you dash grab, I can act, and all these specific scenarios. And I think item characters also do this, where it's like, you put this layer of like a skill check, where it's like, oh, can you Z-catch on reaction to me throwing something at you? And it's such a big difference, because if Diddy throws a banana at you, and you know how to like just Z-catch and fly it back, you effectively have a reflector, right? But if you don't know how to do that, you're going to get shit on, and you're just going to get slapped in the face, smacked into a smash attack. Like, these two worlds are so vastly different. And then back to the Ice Climber point, if the Ice Climber is playing a sword character or a disjoint character, now you have to solve a problem. Because now you have extra hit lag on your shield because you have an additional character and all this other stuff, right? So now all of a sudden the Ice Climber has to go into problem-solving mode, because now the opponent doesn't have to run into this like wall of thorns that is Ice Climbers. And now the Ice Climber player has to, essentially run into this, range disadvantage, which can be really tough, and closing the gap. So I would like people to view this more of like, okay, what problems can I throw at my opponent, and what tools do I have to solve problems? Like a burst option is usually, you can look at it 2 different ways, right? Like, if it's Fox, then your opponent has to respect dash attack at all times, right? So you're establishing this problem that you're not even committing to, really. And then on top of that, Fox has another problem he can throw at you, which is nair on shield. If you let Fox nair on your shield, you're technically in a disadvantage, right? The Fox usually has frame advantage. The Fox usually has some kind of mix-up. So, and even I love thinking about this too when we're talking about lower levels of bracket. So, I mean, we'll get into top level too, but I think at lower levels of bracket, it's so important to really keen in on what your opponent sucks at. Because when you're facing a top level player, it's very hard to do this. And so I don't want to break like that. There's many layers of depth when it comes to like,
definitely levels to this.
Yes, like crazy levels. But most of our viewers are on probably like lower, mid, high level around range. So I want to focus more on that. So and it's easier to explain because the players just aren't as good, right? So if you notice that your opponent just sucks at ledge trapping, but your character is better at juggling, if you're in the first couple rounds and you're like, oh wait, hold up, like this guy's like really trash at ledge trap, getting ledge trap, because he always does this one specific option at this one specific timing, right? Instead of the up throw that you usually do, because it deems it better for the matchup, fuck it, throw them on the ledge. They're trash on the ledge, right? And stuff like that. And that can win you pivotal sets within that mid-level, especially mid-level. And even high-level players have cracks in their armor that they're their weakness. That's why that's probably what they're trying to cover up, or what they're trying to improve on to ascend to that top-level play. Because when you get to that top-level play, it's a lot harder to find these things. Or even if a top-level player sucks at getting ledge trapped or is very vulnerable on the ledge, it's not going to be as vulnerable as like someone that's like lower or mid-level, right? So that aspect I really enjoy talking about.
Yeah, just a quick side note to going into what you were talking about before in terms of like problem versus problem solved being essentially being like based on the tools, right? Also, when you're talking about it in that way of the tools, I really like to think of it as in terms of like how polarizing is that one tool, right? The stronger that singular tool is, then that's something that leans into a problem, versus a lot of times when you have something that is less polarizing, or they even the sheer like aggregate of tools that they have, that character probably is going to lean into a problem solver, right? Like having tools where you have answers to these particular things, so you can compete, right? So you can be competitive in that situation, versus something that is just like, oh, if I hit this or you can't answer this, I just win. Like, that's it, right? I think funny enough, and this is not something that I've had too much time to talk to like Leo about, but like I always thought it was interesting him kind of going for like, kind of staying away from Joker. But like when you look at the character Joker as well, obviously character's insane character, but the character kind of in his base form is kind of like a problem solver, right? I think that once you get to higher level, higher levels of play with gun and like footstool gun and all those kind of things, then that tool itself becomes like a straight problem, right? Because it could just straight body people with it. But I think until you get to that point in that caliber of gunplay, which we honestly don't see from really any Jokers at this point, right? Only kind of in theory. Then the character itself tends to be like kind of more of like Swiss Army knife. The character has a lot of tools for these needs, and it's funny because we had a lot of those characters earlier on in the meta, right? And like we talked about the Palu, we talked about like even like Wolf and those kind of characters that have these kind of tools that they can circumnavigate a lot of things that people can do, right? And can compete in that way. Whereas now people are getting focused on like, okay, how do I kind of avoid these circumstances? And then let me just keep them in this problem. Let me keep putting them like back and back. It's spin cycle, dude, right and back and forth into the same particular situation. And if you cannot solve it, then you get jammed, right? And that's something lower could be the straight tool or the straight like aspect of the game, right? Like you're saying, the ledge trapping. When you identify, oh, this person doesn't know what to do with their juggling. Oh, this person loves to spam their double jump, right? Like, dude, great. I'm going to juggle this person, knock them out of their double jump, and then afterwards, the world is my oyster. I can do anything to this person now, right? They have limited tools, right? And those kind of things, I think, are really important to identify. But, like, yeah, I think sometimes people don't recognize it. That's kind of where, like, the Palu situation comes from and, like, what we've seen from SkyJ, right? Where it's, like, the character itself, like, when you look at Incineroar, this character doesn't have, like, obviously the character's, like, close range, like the buttons that this character has like are insane, right? But when you're talking about the mobility in this game, when you're talking about the shared space in this game, obviously it's really a lone whip that like is that cornerstone that starts that short hop lone whip. That's where they're able to set up that continual testing, right? Hitting people with this problem over and over again. Whereas like Palu, as people have gotten better over time, certain like her Nair at one point was a problem because you just get hit by Nair and you just get hit by 60 damage. But guess what? 60 damage isn't that much anymore. And like, it's like a combination of that and a combination of the nerfs or where that thing became now. It's like, yes, it's still really strong in terms of its utility, but it's definitely changed in and of itself from being a like straight like this polarizing thing that could just win you a matchup, and now it's something that can help you navigate a matchup, which I think is like really interesting how those things change in time.
I just wanted to kind of highlight, I think one thing that you guys were kind of alluding to is that there are characters that are problems, there are characters that are problem solvers, and then there's like blends, and probably every character, yes, like I think you were mentioning, every character is some blend of them, right? Because like they just have tools, right? Like they just have things. The thing with Palu for me is that it's a very much like a problematic character, but there's not a lot of tools to me that are like solving a lot of different types of things. Like, for example, someone presenting themselves as a sumo wrestler. That's how I like to say it, where they just don't want to leave the ground. It's like, no, there really isn't, like, because she doesn't have tilts to check with, like any of her checks is going to be involving a jump or committal dash attack or a grab. Like she doesn't have the and this is the apologist, and this is the reason I quit the character, is she doesn't have tilts to exist in the game in someone forcing that issue over and over again. And so I transitioned to someone like Brawler, who definitely has his fair share of problems that he likes to present in his up B, in a couple of his up Bs. But dude, does he have like some of the coolest maneuverability and ability to change his tools? And there is like one very common move set with him, but there's like actual very important niche situations of when you don't want a ball and you want flashing Mach Punch, like when you're fighting Joker or Incineroar. Like there are people that or Isabel or Villager, there are people that end up utilizing your ball better than you. At least I have an out with me Brawler. Mm-hmm. There are characters that love turtling, Bowser, and like other characters that Game & Watch. This is so cool. Suplex has armor on it, right? And he can armor Game & Watch up being out of shield. He eats the hit and gets him.
Yeah.
So like having that ability to be like, oh, you're turtling, I can use suplex. Oh, you're camping with Pac-Man. Granted, that is my current problem is like hyper campers. Like that's the problem I'm currently trying to solve. Mm-hmm. But I'd rather solve a battle of patience and elusiveness than someone standing still is my problem. Like to me. So, but I can change, and I'm experimenting with burning drop kick because it closes the distance in the air and it breaks the hydrant in one hit. Like there's things to learn with these other tools. Like I'm sure maybe when I fight Little Mac, maybe I want counter. Like maybe it's not really great, but like maybe it kills him in 2 hits or 1 hit. Like it could just work. So there's a lot there that I love in exploring with him. And then I'm currently just getting a secondary for until I learn the real ways of just being that much better than the camping players. Because when they're on par with me, it's annoying. But until I get better than them or solve it completely, I'm going to be learning like Pyramithra and like just generally stronger characters to deal with them. Because I don't think like in Brawler's case, like I don't think he has like a lot of -2s or if any really. But the things he struggles with are projectile spammers and swords. Mm-hmm. And then there's about 12 characters that are both. So it's like there's not a lot of -2s, but there's just a lot of like -0.5s or -1s. Or I'll even call a lot of them even, but the gameplay is like, did I get my giant problem? If I did, it feels even. If I don't get my giant problem and they're able to solve for it enough times, it's a drag.
It's like, did you get
when
SPB?
I look at the bracket, it's like there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
But it's fun. Like I love him so much. He's like the most fun I've had in the game.
Yeah. And I think those are always the classic things, right? Like definitely the age-old thing for anything in traditional fighters is literally like a zoner versus like a grappler, like someone versus Geef. Like Geef is obviously the problem character who runs up like, you can't solve my problem 3 times, you're dead. Right. Yeah. And then that's that, right? Versus the person has to I just have to keep him at bay. Right. And I have these kind of tools to get there. But if he ends up getting his pop quiz, then it sucks to suck, dude. You just got to hold that. And that's always like a interesting thing to see in game. Question for you guys. What do you guys think about in terms of when you are looking to learn a matchup, right? Like, if we're looking at tools or like looking at characters as like, some variants of the problem and the problem solve, what do you guys tend to like instruct people or advise people to figure out first, right? Or what do you think is a thing that helps people on the lower level to understand in terms of like the problem versus maybe the problem solving aspects of a character?
So I think that especially portraying it from that perspective, that you generally want to start with just winning the game. So especially if you are a lower level player playing against other lower level players, finding the hits is not going to be an issue because you're going to find it. Sometimes you're just going to give each other the hits. Like you're going to basically just walk into a forward smash or something of that nature. And so the idea is less about managing your risk reward and more a matter of maximizing your reward, actually getting something that can win you the game and then putting as much of it on the screen as possible. It doesn't matter if it takes a risk if your opponent is not skilled enough to take advantage of that risk and to answer it in the first place. The next level of development on that is if your opponent is answering it, what weakness did they create in themselves that you can now punish for your next best thing? And so I believe we've alluded to this before as your plan A and your plan B. And so generally this comes down to what is your next most rewarding thing that counters what your opponent is answering you with. And from that point, that's generally enough to get you up to mid-level. And I would even say that there's high-level players who just focus on those two things. And then after that is when things like neutral game and finding the ways to disrupt what your opponent is doing is what's going to come into effect. And as Charles mentioned, there are examples like Ice Climbers existing versus Sheik, where the whole issue of the matchup in the first Sheik combos don't work, and she can't actually touch Ice Climbers most of the time. And so what's usually her advantage situations are just inherently disrupted by Ice Climbers existing. And so they basically, one of the character strengths is that they essentially come pre-countered. And so you get to skip that entire segment of the game, or in the case of Game & Watch, usually you have to specifically pick things like high-low mix-ups with your defensive options or your counterplay. And so with Game & Watch, just be it. And even if you're wrong sometimes, just because you're wrong, again, if you are taking risks, but your opponent isn't skilled enough to take advantage of it, even like mid and high level players sometimes won't be able to punish the up B down air before the down air comes out. Is it a true punish? Yes, for pretty much everyone. Is everyone doing it? No. And so there's a lot of mileage you can get from literally just trying to maximize your answer in this case. But in that case, again, it goes down to this is a hybrid thing, because your answer also becomes a problem depending on the context of how you use it. And so the idea here is that once you have developed your problems, you then look at your answers, and then you start looking at how you can mix your problems and your answers so that you're answering things with your problems. And this is where you're coming down to looking how to get your maximal punishes. How can you get that parry into whatever target combo that you're going to do? The parry is the answer, and the target combo is your problem that you're presenting in return. And so ultimately what you then get into, and this is where players are generally high and top level players, is how can you supplant your opponent's problems with your own? And if you can't do that, then you're going to get the people who are very sad that neutral game is just worse than punish game, because the whole problem, or most commonly in my perspective, whenever I hear somebody say that, I'm going to look at their game plan, and the first thing I'm going to look for is, well, what problems are you replacing theirs with? And a lot of the times they're not asking their own problems in return. And so they're answering their opponent's problems 4 or 5 times in a row. And so from their perspective, they're consistently outplaying their opponent. But because they're not putting in their own problems to win the game, it doesn't matter how many times you answer your opponent's thing. You weren't going to win the game anyways. You didn't have any way to do it. Like, you didn't do anything. And so you need to establish your own foot. And so the idea is that you want to win the game before you start trying to stop your opponent from winning the game.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What do you guys think is let's just say, I know we said that like most characters or all characters do have some, it's a spectrum of both on both scales. Do you think that there's one side that is better at being consistent versus one side that is better at higher peaks?
I think like, the more consistent, yeah, I think the
problem players versus problem solving players, like say.
I think the longer we play the game, the problem solver players become better at the game, because they like, especially a game with no patches. A game with patches and new characters, the game's always changing. So I think that kind of environment is better for problem players, because then when a new character comes out, it's like, oh, hey, check it out. It's a new problem.
Solve it.
Yeah, sick. Let me just move on to this one over here, and you can try to solve this problem. And but I think when the game has no patches, that's when it becomes a lot more solidified, and then all the problems eventually get figured out, and it becomes more of a mix-up than a problem. Because even the more I think about it, I don't mind looking at the game like this, but I think it's easier to look at the game where it's like, what's my win condition and what's your win condition? Because I feel like when you look at it like that, it's like, okay. And I think the way Tony is trying to word it as well is very similar to that process, but he's more so just like trying to establish like what's the problem side, what's the problem solving side. But at the end of the day, I think Tony's main point is like know and establish your win condition, right? Because if you don't know how to execute on your win condition, if you can't narrow up smash with Fox, like if you can't corner pressure people with Fox, if you can't find the up air for the last hit, like you're not gonna win the game, right? Like you're just not. But you hit your opponent and you counterplayed their neutral interactions. Like, oh cool, you got the grab, or yeah, you got that one dash attack. But like, it's all about getting the stock right, and I think that's why characters like Wolf and Palu can have fallen out of flavor, because it's just way harder for them to get stocks. And obviously, we've learned the game, plus they've gotten nerfed. But I think earlier meta, and even, think back at the first Genesis. How did Leo win that tournament? Well, he Ike nared everybody except 2 fucking people. And then he Lucina the other 2 people. Light and Void, he went Lucina. Everyone else, he went Ike, and he nared the living shit out of them, because it was month 1 of the game, month 1 or 2 of the game. Not everyone was like, no one, like, I think like New England, like Light and Mars were pretty good at parrying back, like in those back then standards, but not a lot of players could parry. And thinking about that,
and the pressure of the moment too.
Exactly, like you're just execution checking, and Leo knows Smash, right? Like you can't tell me that the best player in the world is clueless about the game. Like he knows and he understands Smash, and he knows what's going to be effective at what point of the game, right? And he's like, okay, everyone's still learning everyone's picking up the game. Like no one's going to be like super nice off stage against me, right? Like where Ike is supposed to be exploited. People are going to be watching edge guards. This is a whole new parry mechanic, right? Like people aren't going to be that good at it. And one of the players that were good at it, Light, he didn't go Ike. He went Lucina instead, right? And that could have been like a matchup thing too. But like, let's think about Pokemon Trainer. Pokemon Trainer was a very simple, effective strategy. Win neutral with Squirtle, boom, toss the Ivysaur, get the down air, or get the Ivysaur grab. These were huge, like quote unquote problem/win conditions that were super simple, super effective at the time, but they eventually fell off. And we can go down the list on and on, right, throughout the course of the meta. But I feel like that eventually stops once we get to a certain
the real problems,
right? Like we haven't even experienced Steve 0 to deathing everyone. All right, guys, you guys think that we're dealing with crazy problems right now? There's more to come.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part about it too, right? Obviously, when you initially start, no one knows shit. So I just need to find something you have a problem with, and then odds are I'm just gonna win, because you don't understand. You don't even know how to use the mechanics to defend yourself, right? You're just sitting there, you're no armor, no nothing, and I'm just freaking slashing at you, right? So like, get bodied. Then I think it's interesting because you get to a certain point, right? Then when people start to learn the game and find out like these baseline problems. And I think the thing about this is when you look at problems aren't just gimmicks, right? You can just have really strong polarizing strategies that are problems. And I think early on, gimmicks work, all that stuff works. So anything that falls under the sun when it comes to a problem works, and you just get bodied by, like you said, I can just jump around and Ike nair all day, and I was one of the best players in the world, right? It didn't matter. Right. And then over time, you get to a point where those things get pushed aside, and you kind of have this spot. And like, I feel like in a growing meta where it's like, okay. And usually this is kind of, it's funny because this is probably what would happen if it wasn't for DLC, because then they introduce problems that way. But say if there was no DLC for a game, say they were all out there, right? I think a lot of times you get to a midpoint where all those kind of gimmicks die down. Right? People understand how to deal with them. And so problem solvers start to move up, right? But then you get to a certain point where people, I've solved it. This is the strong problem, and you have to deal with this. I've optimized this now, right? Now you have to deal with this Oki, and it is what it is. And if I get this, guaranteed you're jammed. Now I got this 0 to death, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no situation where this is not a gimmick. It is the real McCoy. It is what is damaging, right? And I think that's kind of where we kind of go back to where it stabilizes, where like problem solving will always be strong. But I think like both of them, right, it's on the spectrum. Like you need a combination. To like Tony's point, like you need to have the problem solving to mitigate what your opponent is doing, but at the same token, you need to be injecting a problem there to ruffle them and to get your own damage and to get your wins. And a lot of times you take in the information that you're gaining from an opponent during these interactions to understand and identify, how you should utilize this problem, right? Or like in order to just beat this person down. And like we get to that point farther when we get into a meta. So it's like, it's interesting. Like clearly problems are the worst in the beginning of a meta, but then over time you get to a point where things are getting solved. But then you also find the real problems, the real
uncover
things,
the
right?
real problem.
Yeah, not the troll questions, like the actual, like,
yeah,
damn, I need a dissertation or else I'm getting jammed, right? Like that's like that's what happens, you know. And I think that's really fascinating when we get to that point there in games and like in metas, right? And that's where you find the really core fundamental strategies, like, you know, like even like a thing like chess, right? That's where you get these fundamental strategies that people are going to learn in these techniques, because over time now these are the things that have stood the test of time. It's no longer the bullshit anymore, it's the real stuff. And so it's like, I don't think that it ends up with just problem solvers just being above at the end of a meta, because I think that just ignores the fact that, like, yes, you're going to have a lot of the like the nonsense stripped away, but insane problems will emerge, right? Case in point, I think one that's actually like really fun to me is just like Fox, right? Like for Light, right? For the longest time, people were like, oh, well, like this character, like I don't know what's going to happen with this character, right? Because there's all these nonsensical problems that were just bodying Fox off rip. Fox didn't know how to Foxes didn't know how to recover. So you're just getting bodied, right? Like you don't even get to interact. You just get clapped up by some Holix's nonsense, I can air, die at 60, whatever, the end, right? Then at a certain point, like, and I always love these references of like Light, but like, yeah, he started to learn how to navigate these things, how to avoid these problems. And so now he's not dying anymore like that.
Yeah, forcing
now he's jumping on top of you with Nair.
Now he's the problem.
Now he's the problem because he hasn't been able to get to you yet. But now he's there, right? And now it's not only is he optimizing that damage, but now you're dealing with these 50-50s, right? And these mix-ups and all those things, right? And so that's like what emerges from that, you know, from all that nonsense that kept him at bay. Now that's been solved, and now the new problem has emerged, right? But it takes those like in tandem for those things to occur, which is like fascinating to me.
Yeah, creating problems is, I mean, even when I think about Fox meta, you know, way from the start, it's like now Foxes are like, 20 or 30% I dash attack onto PS2 platform, and if I react correctly, I get 80 damage. But like in Smash 4, it was so different because Smash 4 was like, well, hit up tilt combo, do like you can do optimize things with perfect pivot and stuff like that. But it's so weird and different. It took years for Fox players to discover like, oh, hey, like I'm not necessarily true comboing, but if I'm on point, it's pretty much a true combo, right? Like if I just get the reaction tech chase and get the 80 damage, now all of a sudden Fox isn't doing 2-hit combos, he's doing 0 to 80s and crazy shit like that, and kind of shifting things over. And even one of the biggest things I really like thinking about when talking about this topic is different categories of niche play, right? Was platform tech chasing and tech chasing as optimized back then as it is now, right? That alone has changed drastically how Fox plays and how Fox is viewed as a character, because when you are on point with tech chase or platform tech chasing, this character's invincible, or this character feels like never like, oh, Nair up smash, oh, you're at 110, I can't Nair up smash you, well, I'll Nair into tech chase up smash you, like, and you're dead anyway, right? So stuff like that. And even like SDI, right? Pikachu year 1 was getting 6 back airs into whatever the fuck he wanted off stage because no one was SDIing, right? Palutena Nair, no one was SDIing, right? Or like the SDI was a lot weaker, people underestimated it, right? Now SDI has developed to the point where it changed everything. Item play is another thing. I remember Summit 3 watching everyone get out item played by Tweak, right? He was Z-drop daring everyone. He was Z-dropping into aerial recatch, right? So he could have access to his aerials with the items and stuff like that. Mute getting crazy combos nowadays with the items, right? Z-catch. So there's so many different niche parts of the game that just weren't developed, right? So then when they get developed, they either solved problems or caused problems, right? Depending on how you looked at it, or just depending on what your character did or didn't do with the with that specific category. So it's always really interesting stuff. Did you guys have any like closing words about this topic?
I just specifically wanted to mention a couple of practical examples for.
Okay.
So one of the issues with Light at top level currently, right now, for someone who's helping a few players workshop solutions to, is that the struggle is you can answer some of the problems he presents, but replacing them with your own problems is very difficult because the windows of time that Fox tends to leave open as a riposte tend to be small. So usually when you're hitting him with something small. And so the trade-off usually is that he's a fairly light character, combo food, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is at top level of play, most of the characters you're going to run into aren't the characters that make quite as much use of that as you would think, just because it's not it's more of like a pools level thing that comes up, but that's not the level of play that Light is losing to, because he, as a player, can outskill that part of the matchup bracket. So on the second, I think it was funny that you specifically mentioned Leo, because I think 2018 Leo is actually his Ike is a great solution to Seibrik's Palutena problem, and that ultimately he looked at his problem that he wanted to offer is my Nair is a very consistent and rewarding punish. It damage racks and it KOs, and it generally protects me from whatever my opponent's trying to do if they also try to offer me a problem. So they tend to lose to my own problem. And so one of his issues tended to be, well, if I do Nair somebody's block, what do I really get out of it? And the answer was not a whole lot. And so generally what he would do is he would focus on just being a little bit of patient and use timing mix-ups. And so he would alternate between trying to bait out the opponent, trying to answer his problems. Usually he'd use things like backdash, and then he'd just offer another problem, but he would do it in a way so that he was skewing his risk reward while he was doing so. And so he would alternate between essentially countering by going for very safe undershoots, or by just walking up and grabbing and then just repositioning so that they couldn't avoid his undershoots anymore, or he just straight up get a throw combo. And so he found all of these solutions at pretty much launch, just to show how far in advance Leo was. So some of these things, like if you look at 2018 Leo Ike, you can see the general movement still being used in 2019, like 2020. People were just starting to recreate some of his movement patterns and his specific gameplay. That I just think that's very funny. I refer to him as the big mushroom man, because he most of his gameplay mostly came down to him having a big wind-up punch that was safe, and then he would just mix up by taking a step back before he'd wind up punch, and then if you tried to hit him before he swung, well, he stepped back, so then you'd swing into his swing, and then you'd get yourself counter hit by his wind-up punch. And that's really all it came down to. It's just, I believe the expression is elegance and simplicity.
Yeah, Leo was truly ahead of his time, man. Especially like pre-quarantine, it was insane. Amazing player. So, did you guys and anyone else have any closing words on this topic?
I mean, I'll just say shout outs to interesting decisions in DLC game design. I think they had like a plan of like, all right, we're going to establish some norms. You know, this is going to be where the middle of the pack is. This is where we expect some characters to thrive or whatever. And then almost immediately when they started doing DLC after plant, you know, each character feels like it like hyper accentuates certain types of problem. So like Joker is just the all-rounder that is like
he's all-rounder. Yeah.
Yeah, that's his problem. Is that he's like really obviously great at everything. Mm-hmm. And then you have like Min Min's problem is just, you thought range was something before, like check out the extreme here. Sora, the problem is, well, I can go deeper off stage and edge guard you better than anyone. So if you're not strong off stage, you know, have fun solving that problem. Like Kazuya, Touch of Death Master, Terry, what happens if a Shoto's fast? Like it's just every boundary that they had created in the base game is just like they're spiking something about every single character. Yeah. Steve, just infinite tools. Like literally, like what if we take a character that is a tool based character with traps? You know, think of like Pac-Man or what have you, and just give him 6 tools instead of the standard 2 or 3. Like every single one of them really tries to push the boundary of problems that already existed, basically.
Yeah, things that it felt like they established like quote unquote rules before, right? Like, right. Okay, well, like Like you
Paul is it, guys. Paul is the worst of your issues.
Right. Or even like fighting game characters. Well, it's like, okay, well, you won't die off one hit. Like you at least like 2 or 3 hits, and like they're usually
SDI,
slow,
the up tilts,
or
maybe, yeah,
yada yada yada. And then they're like, all right, for fighter pass, like fuck these rules. Like we're out of here. You know what I mean? And they just went crazy, which I think for them it's like an appeal thing too, right? If you're spending money on a character, you want it,
yeah, for sure.
You want it to feel like you're cheating or it's a little broken or whatever. So. Yeah,
but it's I just find it interesting that they're not like, outside of Joker, none of them are like generally like in that general camp, right? Like they all like really hyper push. I think Aegis is just like, what if we give Sheik a sword? Like that's the character,
right?
Like,
and then switch off into another character that can just kill you.
Well, oh yeah, instead of Zelda, you get to become Ganon.
Right, yeah, exactly. The other side of the Triforce. Yeah. Overall, fantastic topic, guys. That's going to be it for us today. Make sure if you guys did enjoy the content, you want to support us, make sure to like and subscribe, and let us know what you guys think in the comments below about, all these different discussions of problems or problem solvers and all that jazz. So please let us know in the comments below. And until next time, class dismissed.
Peace.